Depression and Anxiety Workshop. This is our first time here in Denton at the Denton Rehabilitation Center. It's amazing. I love we have a great crowd. There's so many of you, so thank you for coming. Thank you, Mariella and Frank, for offering your facility for us to do this. We're growing and we're running out of space in the office, so they've kindly brought us in and let us expand here. So we're grateful for that, so thank you very much. So how many people in here know someone or are suffering with depression themselves? How many people know there's different types of depression? Oh, I love it, I love it. So we're going to learn about the different types of depression and what you can do to notice the differences between the two, or three actually, and how you can combat those and work through those in a more natural, holistic way. Because I know a lot of us have been through things where certain circumstances where we've gone and we've tried to get answers every which way and we've come up short on the end. And so we have found an answer with Dr. Demaris and Well Within. So let's learn more about that. Dr. Demaris, we're ready.
All right. All right. Well, thanks to the Cuds again for letting us be here. We decided to make the long trek from Frisco out here. It is quite a trek with the traffic and the road construction. But we're happy to be here. For those of you that don't know me, I actually don't know a lot of you guys. So I'm Dr. Clint Demaris, own Well Within Chiropractic. And you guys know Diane?
Some of you do.
Some of you guys probably know Diane, and you met Maggie. So they run the place. I just work there. So we're here tonight to talk about anxiety. Depression is our main focus topic, and I want to share with you my philosophy and maybe some things that you have not heard of before, and share some technology that you may not have seen. I have recognized in my practice that a lot of people are dealing with depression, and what I've realized as well is that a lot of people don't realize. Maggie mentioned that there are different types of things that can cause depression. The thing is, a lot of the symptoms look exactly the same though, and so if you don't know what the underlying actual cause is, then you can't fix it. And so I tell people all the time that the toughest part of medicine is actually a proper diagnosis. Sometimes the fix is not even complicated, but if you don't actually know what the actual problem is, you're going to have a tough time getting there. One of the other real difficult things with depression is and I realize that there's a time and a place for medication. There really is. So I don't want to say that there isn't. But unfortunately, a lot of people are kind of depressed and they give them some meds. And if their underlying problem is something else that could have been fixed, then that's really not good medicine in my mind, right? What if they had a head trauma, right? What if they had a concussion? And what if they have a food allergy, right? What if that's actually depressing them? And it can. And then, so they would need to apply the fix to that problem. So I'm going to talk about the different underlying causes and then show you guys some technology that we use and give you guys some potential answers. So before I go into any of that though, I just want to back up, tell you a little bit about me and what I do. And I was originally trained as a chiropractor. I went to the chiropractic college here in Dallas, but I actually grew up in Alaska. I was actually talking about that with these guys over here a little bit earlier. I got to tell my one Alaska joke. So how many of you guys are like Texans? Like from Texas. All right. So I had another patient of mine. She went to Alaska on a trip and she bought me a T-shirt, and it has a picture of Alaska, and then inside it has a little picture of Texas. And then on the bottom it says, "Isn't Texas cute?" Because truthfully, if you cut Alaska in half, then Texas would be the third largest state. For those of you that think Alaska's an island over by Hawaii, that's not the case either. That one threw me off in college. You're from Alaska? Did you fly here or in a boat? Or I'm like, well, I mean, you can't drive. And they're like, how? I'm like, you know how they put Alaska over on the side of the map a lot? Like, no, it's actually up here. So anyway, I grew up there. Loved it. I love going back. It's awesome. Had some great adventures up there. My wife would not live there though. We went up for vacation and she's like, Place is awesome, it's beautiful, but I'm not going there. There's like a moose running around, and she's like, no, I don't think so. But as a kid though, what kind of happened when I was younger was my mom got real sick. I was about 8 years old, and kind of went through the standard medical procedures, if you will, and to a bunch of different docs. And at the end of the day, they all kind of said, we're not really sure what's going on. We think you're just depressed. Why don't you take some Prozac? And my parents were like, I just don't think that's it. I think it's a little more complicated than that. She had super bad fatigue. She had hives all over her body. She was sleeping 14 hours a day. She was having digestive issues. All sorts of stuff was going on. And so some friends of ours said, hey, there's another guy in town, a natural doc. His name was Wayne. Everybody called him Weird Wayne. Go see Weird Wayne. And they were like, not unlike maybe some of you, they're like, well, what do we got to lose? We've already spent a ton of money. We've already, wasted a ton of time. We really haven't gotten anywhere. So why don't we go try it out? Well, this guy was really talented, very gifted, and he figured out what was going on like right away. You got this problem, you got this. Started treating her, and boom, within just a few weeks, few months, she was back on track. And that was kind of our family's first introduction to a different thought process, if you will, about the body. And we kind of carried that through. So throughout my younger life, we had this philosophy. And then I graduated from high school, went to college for a year. I decided I was going to be an engineer. Went to school for a year to be an engineer, then decided to go on a mission trip for my church, so I left Alaska, went to Guatemala, which was a really, really cool time. 2 years in Guatemala, came home, and then decided and realized right away, engineering, no, I need to do something with my gifts and talents, and prayed about it a lot, and I just realized this is what I needed to do. And I just asked, I prayed a lot and said, hey, lead me to the right techniques and the right mentors and the people who have the right technology. And consequently, I've really met some of the very, very, very cutting edge docs out there, and I learned some of the things that I do now. And as I said earlier, I was originally trained as a chiropractor. I'm going to tell you about my philosophy. When you see the demos that I do, you'll see that I adjust people, like all chiropractors, but there's a whole lot of other things that we're doing, and that's based on our fundamental philosophy about the body. And our philosophy is actually really simple, and that is that your body knows how to heal. How many of you guys agree with me? Your body know how to do it? It does. I literally tell this, and Maggie's probably sick of hearing it, because I tell every single new patient that comes in, every single time. Your body knows how to heal, and if it has a problem of any type, it is not because it forgot how to function. It's because something's in the way of your function. And so we need to figure out what is in the way. If we remove those barriers, your body will do its job. It will do the healing. The body is a self-healing mechanism. And so what we don't want to do is cover up symptoms. We don't want to put a Band-Aid on the problem. We want to know why the problem is there to begin with. And unfortunately, we kind of do this a lot in medicine. We find a symptom. We then take the pill, potion, or lotion that gets rid of that symptom. And then, right? Like for instance, what do most people do if they get a headache?
Take an aspirin.
Take an aspirin, take a Tylenol, right? Could those get rid of a headache?
They could.
Sometimes, right? Do those get rid of the reason why you have headaches, though? No, they don't. That's just management, right? So that would literally, just treating symptoms is literally like driving down the road and having your check engine light come on in your car, saying you got a problem with your engine, and then being like, well, and put a piece of tape on the light. And saying, well, I fixed that. That was annoying. We're good, right? She had a daughter who did that.
I have a daughter that would put duct tape over her dash so she didn't see the light.
I'm not even going to ask how that turned out.
That Honda went down.
Yeah, that's surprising, right? That's surprising. But I thought we fixed it, right? No. Anyway, but we do that all the time, right? So people come into my office and they say that they have these disease processes, and in many instances I tell them, well, let's diagnose your problem for real. I'm like, well, no, I have chronic fatigue. I have fibromyalgia. I have, irritable bowel syndrome. And I'm like, no, see, those aren't diagnoses. Those are just symptoms. All right? I mean, think about that. You go into the doc with fatigue and you tell him, I'm super tired, and they run all these labs and scope you and prod you and do an MRI and X-ray, and they say, we figured it out. You have chronic fatigue. It's like, pretty sure I told you that. I want to know why I have chronic fatigue, okay? Right? And so it's like, that's not really a diagnosis, right? Well, I have irritable bowel. Same thing. It's like, that's not a diagnosis. You have irritable bowel? Like, I'm pretty sure I told you that my bowel was upset, right? Why is my bowel upset? I want to know why, right? So, once again, I understand people got to do what they want to do. So, or what they need to do. So I don't want anybody to feel bad if that's the way they've been managing their issues, but I want you to know that there are potential answers out there for the real reasons that you have your problems. And this right here, these 6 building blocks are the reason why you actually have your problems. Hey Maggie, am I still on the camera if I stand right here?
Barely.
Barely, okay. So your problem could be neurological. When I say neurological, this is the connection within your body. This is your body's communication system. So if your communication system is impaired in any way, shape, or form, you could have any number of different symptoms, right? So, and a good example of this would be head trauma. I'm going to talk about that a little later. But if you have a concussion, which a lot of people have had concussions and are unaware that they've actually had a concussion, that could affect your brain and your spinal cord's ability to connect and communicate with the rest of your system and create all sorts of problems, right? So the neurological aspect is super important. And it's really important in depression. We'll talk about that. Could be structural. Now this is where most people think of chiropractors. We're going to go and get an adjustment. How many of you guys have ever been adjusted? There are a lot of you. So the adjustment's really powerful, and the adjustment is not just about pain management though. The adjustment is actually about the function of the nervous system. Think about it. If you get an adjustment in the middle of your back here, those nerves are controlling your heart, your lungs, your stomach, your organ systems. There's a connection here. So it's really important that we have proper movement within our spine so that our systems can function. It could also be nutritional. This is a big deal. We do not eat well anymore, unfortunately. The acronym for the standard American diet is SAD. It's sad. Unfortunately, if you eat the standard American diet, you're going to end up, the majority of people, with some type of physical problem. It's just the way that it is. So we don't eat well, and this isn't going to be a nutritional lecture per se. I'm not going to go into all the reasons why, but there's a lot of reasons why our food supply is not good. We don't rotate our crops right. We use artificial fertilizers. We use pesticides, herbicides. We genetically modify things. We hybridize stuff. Through selection, we select just the ones that are the biggest and have the thickest skins. And what we've done is we've actually created products that work well for transportation and for marketing and for industry, but not for health. All right? So the nutritional quality, and you can actually see studies that the government has done, and they literally show, like for instance, spinach, the iron content in spinach has gone down dramatically. And I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was like 90%. The amount of iron that used to be in spinach just a few decades ago versus now. So we're losing mineral content in our food because of the way that we're doing things. So if you don't have the building blocks, your body is not going to be able to do its functions. Like, it literally is like asking a carpenter to build you a house and then not giving them all the materials. Right? If you don't have zinc, you don't have iron, you don't have B vitamins, you will not be able to make simple hormones, neurotransmitters, repair tissues, things like that. So some people's depression and anxiety comes down to their diet, nutrition. It could also be immune function. When we talk about immune function, we're talking about food allergies, infections, and autoimmune issues. And all of those, unfortunately, can be very difficult to detect. The symptoms that you have from those are not always very obvious. So this is a really big one. We spend a lot of time and energy in this when I talk to people, because 80 to 90% of food allergies don't hurt your stomach. So somebody may come in with depression or fatigue, and I may tell them they need to avoid a food, and they'll go, well, that's kind of weird. I eat that all the time. I seem to feel fine. What they're saying is it's not hurting their stomach, but what they don't realize is that may be the cause of how they're feeling. So, like I said, we talk about this a lot. I hear this from people every day. Okay, you need to go gluten-free. And they're like, oh, really? That's weird. I eat sandwiches and pizza all the time. I'm just here because I got these headaches. I just want to get rid of the headaches. And what people don't realize is that food allergies or sensitivities, not only do they not hurt the stomach, but the reactions can be very delayed. So they can eat a sandwich and literally get a migraine 3 days later. It doesn't have to happen right away. Eat the peanut, your throat swells up, and that happens in a very, very small percentage of food issues. Most food allergies are not that way. So It's very, very common in our world today for people that have food allergies. The most common is going to be gluten, dairy, soy, corn, nightshades, eggs. Those are the biggest ones that we see. And so, if you're unaware of what food issues you may have, I suggest you get tested just because it can make such a big difference. I could literally tell you all day long stories of people who dropped a certain food and dropped weight, their anxiety, their depression, their insomnia, their skin rash, their pain, all of a sudden just woof. I had a lady one time lose over 100 pounds. She had a problem with gluten. Once again, she didn't have any stomach pain when she ate it, but it was creating such a massive amount of inflammation in her system. It was wreaking havoc on her hormones. Had people who couldn't get pregnant. That's kind of a funny one when your wife goes and tells people that my husband helps people get pregnant all the time. That sounds funny. So immune function. In the immune function category, you're also looking at underlying infections. We've had a lot of people with mono. Anybody here had mono or know somebody who's had mono? That feels a lot like depression, doesn't it? So, I have people come in, I'm depressed, and I'm like, no, you have mono. What? Yeah, you have a virus that is literally just destroying your energy system, and so you can barely get things done. It's affecting your mental function. So what feels a lot like depression is actually an infection, right? So once again, there's other causes of this. So we're going to talk a little more about that in a bit. Autoimmune disease. Anybody here know somebody or themselves that has an autoimmune issue? Hashimoto's, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's, anything like that? That's another one. The most common tissue affected by autoimmunity, especially for women, is the thyroid. And the second most common tissue affected is neurological tissue. So you could have a depression and have an autoimmune issue and have no idea that that's why you're struggling so bad. It could be toxicity. We live in a world with about 85,000 different chemicals in it. If your body's not doing a good job of getting rid of those chemicals, or you're actually getting too much from your food, from the chemicals we're putting on our bodies, ladies, I'm sorry, but here's the best rule of thumb. If you can't eat it, you probably shouldn't put it on your skin. Because if you put it on your skin, it's going to absorb right into your system. So I highly recommend that you look at cleaner products. And there's a lot of them out there now. You don't have to spend any more money. Matter of fact, you can even save money by not buying the chemical stuff and buying the more natural stuff. So being careful. The average female is putting hundreds of chemicals on her body every single day, just with makeup and perfumes and sprays and cleaning products and lotion and all that stuff. Right? So some people, I mentioned headaches a few times. I've had people, women with headaches, and I went through with my testing, which I'll show you in a little bit, tested all their products, took them off a whole bunch of their makeup and whatever, and all of a sudden, they don't have headaches anymore. Right? So don't overlook the personal care and the cleaning products and things like that. And then the last piece is actual emotional stress. Do you guys agree with me that stress can make you sick? Yeah. Can stress make you real sick?
Yeah.
Can stress kill you?
Yeah.
Yeah, you better believe it. And so what I found in my office is that a lot of people's physical problems actually started with stress, or it has a stress component to it. And you can't really address the whole person if you don't address the stress. They're not really separate. And that's part of the thing that we're dealing with right now, is we've been trained that way. It's like if you have a physical problem, you go take, what I call the pill, potion, or lotion. And if you have a stress problem, then you go and talk to your counselor. Pastor, bishop, bartender, I don't know, right? Right? But we treat them as if they're separate. The thing is, they're integrated. They're so connected, you can't separate them. Mind, body, spirit, completely integrated. So most people are astounded when I tell them that they may have a stress component to their problem. But when we start treating them, it starts making sense. So these 6 things right here cause, and this may sound like a bold statement, all your problems. Every problem you have, every symptom you have, comes back to an issue in these categories. So when I look at somebody, when I treat them, I simply look to see what's their neurological function like. Do they have any deficits in the cranial nerves and their lumbar or cervical myotomes? If there is, we use light therapy. Do they have any structural abnormalities that's getting in the way? Treat their cranials, treat their feet, treat their knees, treat their back. Do they have any nutritional deficiencies? Like I said, in America right now, almost everybody that comes to see me needs nutrition. So are they missing some key building block of nutrition? What's their immune function like? Do they have food allergies? Do they have infections? Do they have autoimmune situations happening? Get rid of the chemicals, start working on the stress, and you'd be amazed at how many things can change. The human body is absolutely amazing. People can recover. I had a lady in Oregon one time. She was, gosh, how old was she? 83. And she had a stroke in the dentist office. So lost all function on half of her body, put her in a wheelchair. They went in to the doc, you know, and they were talking about rehabilitation. And the doc pretty much just said, she's too old, like, we're not gonna worry about rehab. You know?
Yeah.
So they came to our office and they said, what do you think? I said, well, I think anybody can recover. So we started doing light therapy, and she got out of the wheelchair, started walking again. And she was really happy. And then like 6 months later, she fell and broke her hip. We went in, screwed it all together. And you know, that can be a death sentence for somebody at that age, right? They go in, similar kind of thing. She comes back, says, what do you do? I said, rehab. We did the light, we got her back again. And she, I won't tell you what she said about her doc, but but she recovered. I mean, she's in her 80s, right? It is not too, it's not too late to recover, for the nervous system to rehabilitate. The body, and the human body is absolutely amazing if you address it correctly. So let's talk a little bit about, specifically more about anxiety and depression, really more on the depression category. So here's how I like to define it. I mentioned that there's some different categories. All of them stem from these. But the way I want you to think about it is there are 3 categories or types of depression, the way I like to call it. Your first type, kind of the first piece of the pie, is what most people think of when we think of like psychological depression. Psychological, we're talking about traumas, belief systems, you know, stress, you know, the dynamics of things, right? And so that's in the psychological realm. So people can be depressed because of that. There's a lot of things. I mean, who gets out of this world without some trauma? Do you know anybody? I don't know anybody. Life can be traumatic. It can be very difficult. So we're dealing with that, right? So the emotional aspect. And this is where most people think all depression resides. We just need, you know, it's right in here. But there's a huge other piece, and this is where we've had a lot of success, and that is, I call it brain depression. It's literally like your mind is not actually, you're like the actual hardware, if you will. The actual hardware, if you were thinking of this like a computer, it's having breakdowns, right? So if you've had a head trauma, I mean, I know people who have had head traumas and they are majorly depressed. And what's happening is it looks and feels like psychological depression, but their brain is actually not able to function appropriately. So their brain is depressed. It's not, if you wanted to use the analogy of, it's not spinning fast enough. Kind of like a top, you know, if you spin a top or a quarter and it's spinning, if it's spinning fast enough, it stands upright, right? But you know that in-between phase where it starts kind of like waffling and wobbling all over the place? That's where they're at, right? They have a breakdown neurologically. And so they're having a real hard time being able to do the things they need to do. So the neurological aspect of this, you know anybody with learning disability, dyslexia, reading problems, anything like that? Yeah. These things can get in the way. This is a development thing, right? The light therapy that we do, we've had tons of success. It's probably one of the best things that we do in the office is our treatment for reading disorders and dyslexia. Help to connect some of these pathways that are weakened or didn't get connected appropriately, help to connect those, and the light therapy just amplifies nerve signals. I'm going to do a demo of this here in a little bit. This is one of the light devices we use, it's called a GRT light. See that flashing through my finger? Can you see that? Just a red light. It functions at a very specific wavelength and very specific frequency, and at that wavelength and frequency, we can amplify nerve signals. And so you can take a damaged or weakened system and you can immediately change it. We've had people get their hearing back, sense of smell back, numbness, tingling, weakness, any number of neurological issues, speed up that recovery. So that would be the neurological piece of it. I mentioned the immune function piece. So when you're talking about depression, you cannot overlook all of the different infections. Like I said, there's so many infections. There's a group of infections that's obvious. When you get it, when you have the flu, you know you have the flu. You got a temperature, you got chills, you got stomachache, you got diarrhea, you're throwing up, whatever it is, and you know that you have an infection. But I'm going to list the whole entire section of different types of infections that are not always obvious. So I mentioned mono, Epstein-Barr, parasites, So we kind of think parasites are just a third world problem, right? Trust me, it is not. Probably over half of you here right now have parasites. Just the way that it is. Parasites are all over the place. They could be considered one of the most advanced organisms on the planet. And by very definition, it is something that lives off the host without being detected. So what's the number one sign and symptom of parasites?
No symptoms.
No real symptoms at all, right? So I have people come in and they are depressed, and what I find is that they have what we call leaky gut. You guys familiar with this term? How many of you guys know what leaky gut is? Leaky gut is, if this was the lining of your small intestine, your digestive system, your body with enzymes and hydrochloric acid and things breaks down the food, and when it gets small enough, it goes through the lining and into your bloodstream. And this should be about 4 or 5 micrometers. But what happens is, because of parasites, fungus, yeast, mold, bacterial infections, SIBO, the list is huge. You can break down that wall, and all of a sudden you got these big gaping holes there. Stuff that's not completely broken down gets into the bloodstream, creates a massive amount of inflammation. Your body can start attacking it. You're not actually absorbing nutrients well. You haven't broken down all those proteins well. You start having problems. And so the way that we like to describe it, one of the companies that I really like, and one of the lecturers that I really enjoy, he likes to say, if you got inflammation here, you got inflammation here. Gut inflammation leads directly to brain inflammation, right? So in their world, it's like, if you got problems with neurologically, emotionally, you gotta look here first. Clean up the gut. So, like I said, it's somewhat difficult to figure this out. So, once again, I could tell you dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of stories of people who had these breakdowns. They had leaky gut because of these infections and food allergies. We got rid of those, and then guess what? Their depression, gone. Right, they're gone. I knew a girl one time, she went on a mission to the Dominican Republic, came home early, she was an absolute mess. They said that she was depressed, probably she just missed home or something, and she was telling them, I don't really miss home, I'm having a really hard time. They put her on some meds, didn't really help that much, so they sent her home. She came to see me. I did my workup and said, ooh, I'm pretty sure you have at least 14 different gut infections. Put her on a protocol with some herbs and some essential oils, cleaned up her gut, and within a few weeks she was totally back to good, back to normal, not depressed. Like we would think psychologically, right? She didn't have anything in her life that was actually depressing per se. Everything else was pretty good. So, leaky gut from any of those infections, very difficult to detect. Some of the only symptoms that you may, once again, somebody thinks parasites, they think, oh, I got raging diarrhea or something. Well, once again, no. You could have just a slight disturbance, slight bloating, maybe just a little bit of upset stomach. Maybe you have a little bit of constipation, or maybe you get some loose stools every now and then, but it's nothing that seems very severe. That could all be a symptom that you may have a gut imbalance. Bad sugar cravings, that could be another one. So the other thing I mentioned was food allergens. That's another one of those real silent ones. And I talked about this a little bit already, but you could create leaky gut and you could have all sorts of inflammation that's creating inflammation in your system and in your brain because of the food allergens. So food allergies and infections, heal the leaky gut, heal the lining of your stomach, could be the underlying reason why you're having, like I said, brain depression. The other things that can happen, toxicity. So when we talk about, I talked about toxins here, right? There's a bunch of people out there who are, how many of you guys have done any of the genetic testing? Ancestry or 23andMe, have you guys heard of this? Mm-hmm. So you can go and do a cheek swab. Well, it's actually not a cheek swab, you spit in a little container. And I mean, they're cheap now. I did one over the break, it was like $59, I think. So you can do a genetic test, and what they'll do is they can literally break down all of the different enzymes that your body makes, and they can literally show you genetically, if you got it from one or two sides, what things you're going to have difficulty with. How many of you guys have heard of MTHFR? Anybody heard of that? That's a genetic thing, right? So you can take the genetic test and say, look, I don't methylate very well. What does methylation lead to? Depression. anxiety, right? Depression and anxiety can be a part of a methylation problem. This is a genetic SNP, they call it. So if you have a SNP from one side of your family, you lose about 30% function. If you have a SNP from both sides, you lose about 70. So one of the other really common things that I see is some of the enzymes needed to get rid of the toxins in the body, people have genetic SNPs there. So guess what happens to those people? Just a little bit of chemical, a little bit of fragrance, a little bit of perfume, really messes them up. Can't deal with it very well. I've had people that were literally housebound because they couldn't even go out to the mall, they couldn't go to church, they couldn't leave. If anybody's wearing perfume, if they're wearing deodorant, cologne, I mean, they are wiped out. I mean, I know people where, I mean, literally, they're like, the next 3-4 days are going to be really hard. And so they struggle. That can very much be genetic. So through supporting that system with some specific minerals, vitamins, essential oils, and then getting rid of as much chemical as they can out of their life, I've had a lot of those people, get back into life, so to speak. They can go to the mall, and they can go to church, and they can do things. They still have to be very careful, but that pathway affects them. There are other genetic SNPs that affect our neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters, you guys heard of serotonin? This is kind of the neurotransmitter they've keyed in on for depression. Well, because of these genetic SNPs, some people don't make or break down serotonin appropriately. They actually call it the warrior gene. If you don't break down serotonin well, they actually, instead of being depressed, they're like, fire off, they're hot, they got short fuses, called the warrior gene. But you can look at it, and without even knowing the person, you can say, ooh, that guy's probably got a short fuse, and doesn't do well with chemicals, and has trouble with his cholesterol, and probably is having trouble with their energy, and they probably have trouble with their blood pressure. You can see it all mapped out right on this little test. Right, so that, to me, once again, that's brain depression here. This isn't psychological. This is like, you got a neurotransmitter problem here. Dopamine is another big neurotransmitter. It has a lot to do with reward, pleasure, motivation. If you have an issue there, a lot of people they've actually been able to literally prove with research that certain types of dopamine SNPs, there's a much higher level of addiction. Dopamine is involved with addiction. So they can literally say, yeah, unfortunately you got a higher likelihood of ending up with an addiction of some type because of this genetic SNP. Right? You got these dopamine receptor problems. So anyway, I'm not going to go too much more into genetic stuff. It's kind of fun to talk about, but what I'm telling you is, how many of you guys have seen depression run in families or anxiety? Yeah, I see it. I look at the thing and I talk to them and I go, hey, is your mom or you got anybody else in the family depressed? Oh yeah. They'll say, it's usually like, yeah, that side of the family or this side of the family. And my dad's side, like, yeah, I got an aunt, cousin, they're all kind of depressed. And so it could be genetic, and it could be, you could all have the same food allergen. They all have a gluten problem, right, or whatever it is. So some people pop right out, and we give them the right supplements, and they come back like, wow, my brain's working a lot better than it has in a really long time. I feel really, really, really good. And that's because we were able to kind of help strengthen up some of those weakened pathways. I mentioned nutrition, and the nutritional aspect when it comes to depression, we're really key in on that serotonin neurotransmitter. So there are a couple nutrients that you have to have. So for you to actually make serotonin, you have to have a particular amino acid. Anybody know what that is? Tryptophan, yeah, 5-HTP. You've got to have tryptophan. That's an amino acid. If you don't have it, you cannot make it. Okay, so you've got to get it in your diet. And you need some very particular minerals and vitamins, and B6 is one of those. So if you've got a problem with B6, you're going to have a problem making serotonin. And if you have a problem making serotonin, you're going to have problems making melatonin, which means you're not going to sleep well. And that's critical. If you're not sleeping well, it creates all sorts of problems. So once again, I give people some activated B6 sometimes, and all of a sudden they're just like, bing, I feel better, I'm sleeping better, I got more energy, all these things are starting to click and work, right? So the nutritional aspect of it can be big. So far, does anybody have any questions at all? Any comments on this? Okay, so like I said, this is the brain depression area. All of these different things that I mentioned can affect your brain's ability to function appropriately and you may feel depressed, unmotivated, tired, fatigued. You feel like you just don't have, you don't have the energy to focus. You're not motivated. You don't want to go see people. You're not, things that you used to do aren't fun anymore. All of that stuff can happen from this. And the dramatic one, once again, where you really see it is the head trauma. Somebody's just clipping right along in life, things seem to be going good, and then they get that car accident, they get that football accident, all of a sudden, they're like a different person. Anybody ever seen that? I mean, it's like, well, that's weird, man. This guy's like a different person all of a sudden. You're like, hey man, let's go bowling. They don't want to go anymore. They're gaining weight. They're starting to lean towards addictive things, and that's because what happens with some people in addiction, if their brain is not functioning well and they use something and it makes their brain feel better, guess what?
They become addicted.
Yeah, quickly, right? Because they just don't feel right. Their brain doesn't feel right. So one of the sad truths about addiction is when they use, they finally feel normal. Because that spinning, it's just not right. Right? They're just not able to always connect. And then they use whatever it is, and all of a sudden, they go, wow! That's what it's like to feel normal. And so that's what creates addictions, right? So a lot of people with addictions have brain chemistry problems. So once again, if somebody comes to my office, and I've actually helped a lot of people with addiction, we do counseling, right? Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't get counseling. Problem is, you've got a genetic SNP, and you've got a horrible diet, and you've got 5 or 6 other things that are leading to, you've had a concussion, and you are now using something to get your brain to work. Do you think sitting down and talking about it's going to change anything? Not going to change anything. Because, the person may understand, logically that they shouldn't do X, Y, Z, right? But they're drawn so powerfully because they want their brain to work that they just can't get away from the addiction. So what I find is that with a lot of those individuals, if I help balance their brain chemistry with the right nutrition, get rid of the heavy metals, or get rid of the food allergen, heal the leaky gut, the desire for whatever it is they're using goes down significantly, right?
Can stress affect your brain chemistry?
Absolutely.
So that it affects everything, then it goes on to affect everything else?
Absolutely, right? High levels of cortisol from stress have negative impacts all over the system. All over the system, right? I'll mention 2 other issues with the brain depression, and then we'll talk about some of the others and we'll do some demos. But we talked about chemicals. The other thing that's a big deal is metals, heavy metals. You guys heard of this? Heavy metals, yeah, heavy metal can have a huge impact on your system, particularly the nervous system. Right? So if you've got any bad metal fillings, you want to check those out. I mean, it can be, mercury is a major depressant, major. Any other questions? That was a good one. No? Okay. So then the last section here, so we talked about the brain depression. The last section is spiritual. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but if you're living outside, if you're incongruent with your own belief system, that can be depressing. So if your belief is that you should be faithful to your spouse and you're cheating on your spouse, that could lead to a type of depression. And I see it all the time. People go, I just don't understand what's wrong in my life. And I'm just depressed. And it's like, well, this is a big incongruency here for you. And so those 3 can all look the same, feel the same, symptoms can be the same, but they're not the same, right? Because if you don't diagnose the real underlying cause, you're not going to be able to actually correct it, right? And it sounds like I may be, talking bad about psychology or therapists or anything. I'm actually not. I think a lot of people need it, and it's good for them. But I'm simply just saying that when anybody has an addiction, or they're depressed or they have anxiety, to go straight into therapy without looking at these other aspects, you may miss the boat. Right? And if somebody says, well, I took Prozac and I felt better, what does that say?
It covered up the symptoms.
They have a brain problem then, because we know the drug actually helped them to feel better. So we know you have a problem with your neurotransmitters then, right? If you take a med and it feels better, you got a chemistry thing we need to address. So let's take a step back and say, wait a minute, what's going on with that neurotransmitter? Why would you need it? Right? You know what I'm saying? And yeah, you're just covering up that symptom.
I'm sorry, could we just, so there's 3 types, I think I missed.
So yeah, psychological,
Psychological, okay.
brain depression, and spiritual.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, those are like those 3 big categories, right? And they all need very different fixes.
When you talk about the brain section and you treat people and see improvement, is it typically something that you continually supplement and do throughout their lives in order for them to see lasting results, or
Not
a
usually.
little bit of both?
Not usually.
Short-term treatment, long-term fix, usually?
So that's a really great question. Most people's problems in the brain category are usually something that you can address right away and you can see changes right away. The only time where we see like really long term would be like if they have a genetic SNP, like they have a methylation problem, they may have to take activated B vitamins. That may be something they need to do ongoing. If they've had a really bad head trauma and they really did some major damage or a stroke, if the neurological impact was large enough, they may need to make concessions for that. But for the most part, you take the nutrition until your nutritional status gets up, and then I encourage people to eat better, right? If it comes to immune function, get rid of the food allergy, get rid of the infection, and then you're good, right? Most of the time we can get rid of infection issues within the first few weeks, and then that's all they gotta do. They may have to, check back in on that just to make sure, but that doesn't take a year or 2 or longer. That's usually short term. Toxicity, same kind of thing. Most of the time you can deal with the toxicity issues within the first few months. It's not like you have to continue to take a detoxifier forever. We'll talk about this in a second. We already mentioned the neurological, so that's kind of the way I look at it. So there are some things that may be longer term, but for the most part, you can kind of address and figure it out. And then it becomes, management on your own. If you got a food allergen, you just have to avoid it. A lot of people come in and say, yeah, I did pretty good. Then Christmas rolled around and I got up, I died. I'm just not feeling good. Tired, I'm not focused, not very motivated, and I'm depressed right now. I'm just not feeling good. And they just need to go back on their diet and manage it. So was that a?
Yeah, well, and then kind of a follow-up to that is it one of those situations where the longer they have dealt with it, the longer it takes to fix, or
Not necessarily. No, you could have a gluten allergy for 40 years of your life, and I could make you go gluten-free, and within 3 weeks you could be like heaven's just opened. I mean seriously, it can be that. I don't want to be overly dramatic, but I do have people come in and say, I just cannot believe, I'm having a hard time believing that I've been doing this stuff my whole life, and I literally just had to stop eating bread, and I'm feeling this much better. It's crazy. So it can be. So not necessarily.
In this structure, where does something like a functional neurological disorder, because that's kind of broad and vague, and I know there's factors, but in this model, is it
Give me an example. What do you mean functional neurological? Are you talking about like a personality
tremor
disorder?
yeah.
So that can be more difficult. Like some people have with tremors, that can be genetic as well, kind of an inherited thing. Typically though, somebody that has a tremor, it doesn't lead to depression though. That's like a separate thing from them feeling depressed, if that makes sense.
Right.
But there are other issues that are more serious when it comes to like autoimmune diseases and dementia, Alzheimer's, things like that.
Okay.
So I don't know if that was a good answer for you there.
It does. I'm putting it together and making the connections, of course, having more information
Yeah.
than you do with just the questions. So, okay, thank you.
These are good questions. You guys are doing great. Any other questions? So I did want to mention just a few other things, and this is, particularly this was a good thing for me to learn. If you're dealing with somebody who has depression, it may be difficult to understand. Right? Anybody ever been in that boat? Like you're trying to deal with a family member, a friend, or whatever, and they're just trying to tell you they're depressed, and you're like, really? It's like, okay, I get depressed too. Just figure it out, It can be really difficult. It can be a difficult challenge to try and help them, know how to help them. The things that I would tell you is one, let's get a proper diagnosis of what's actually going on so that you can, so you can get maybe somewhere. But to just be empathetic and compassionate and understanding. It may not be something that you understand, and it may not be something that you can just say, be more positive thinking, that's the problem. You're just not positive enough. And the problem with that is there are people who literally do need to be more positive, but if the problem is, once again, you had a concussion, you got in a car accident, and by the way, this is very common. You get in a car accident, and you hit your head, what are they concerned about? They're going to be concerned about a bleed, a fracture, like serious stuff, right? Which they should be, right? But it's very common for them to do this whole entire workup. You didn't break anything, no bleeds. Here's some anti-inflammatories, and you walk out. You're done. And then a couple days later, you go, man, I'm getting some headaches. I'm having some trouble focusing. I've just got a short temper right now. I'm having trouble sleeping. My appetite's weird. My appetite's gone or it's crazy. Getting a little dizziness or vertigo. I mean, that doesn't happen right away. You're actually, what's that?
Concussion syndrome.
Wait, I'm sorry?
Concussion syndrome.
Oh yeah, concussion syndrome. I mean, there are so many different things that could happen within that. And depression, vision issues, all of a sudden headaches. But I have seen so many people where they don't get those symptoms until a while after. It's not like they had the accident. They're running on adrenaline right after the accident. So when they go
How many
in,
veterans find you?
what's that?
How many veterans find you?
So, well, I wish more did.
Yeah.
The veterans that I have treated, and I'll tell you about PTSD here in a second when I do the emotional technique. We actually there's a new movie out on Amazon called Stressed. And that is actually about the technique that I'm going to demo here in a minute. We finished up a study at Thomas Jefferson University, published it, and it was lights out. Like we showed with fMRIs of the brain that this is somebody with PTSD, and then they did the treatment, and then they did the fMRI of the brain again, and literally showed change. And not only did they tell people that they felt better and that they didn't have the same PTSD triggers and stuff, but they were actually able to show it in the brain. So very cool. So anyway, we can talk about that more. I wish I was able to get there. The only difficulty, one of the difficulties you run into with veterans is there's a training that they go through kind of mentally that's hard, right? It's like they haven't been trained to talk about their problems. You tough it out. They end up self-medicating a lot. And the government programs that they're involved with as far as paying for things, that's just a difficult thing, right? So anyway, that's kind of where we're at with that. But if you know people that need help with that or have connections, I'm more than happy to talk to them because we've had great success. We've had good success. So what I was saying though, if you know somebody who is, be understanding, be empathetic. Just telling them to be more positive is not helpful. Matter of fact, it usually makes it worse, like I said, because here's somebody, if they've had a head trauma, that, like I said, they didn't know about. They don't know they had a concussion because it was never diagnosed. They got in a car accident, you know, they didn't break the windshield, the airbag didn't go off, so they say, well, you probably don't have a concussion. Not true at all. I mean, you can have a concussion from an accident, and it doesn't have to seem like a lot. You can just slip and fall weird, just hit your head kind of strange, and you could have a concussion. You can have the concussion in the car accident without even hitting your head. Just the whiplash itself. I mean, if you think about the consistency, your skull is really hard. Your brain's the consistency of Jell-O, and you just got slammed up against your skull, and you can't see the fact that there's inflammation in there. If you could see the brain, it would be inflamed, just like you had a bruise on your arm, right? But it's inside, so you can't see it. So if this person's having a hard time, just telling them to be more positive, you know, is that going to be helpful? No, it just makes it worse because then they start thinking there's something wrong with themselves, you know? And a lot of people get treated that way, and unfortunately what's happening is it's making them even more depressed. Because what they're hearing is they just need to be more positive, they need to work harder, you know, what's going on with you and all this stuff. And we need to have a lot more compassion for what's maybe actually going on with them. I cannot tell you how many people come to my office, I sit them down, do a report, tell them all the things that I found, and they start crying. And I'm like, oh, well, what's going on? And they're just like, well, I've been treated like I'm crazy for the last, 15 years, and then I found out that I actually have mono, or whatever it is, right? I have celiac disease, and I'm not crazy, I've been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, and everybody thinks I'm a hypochondriac, and I go in and find, you have pesticide toxicity because you live next to a chemical company and they dump stuff in the water. I mean, this stuff happens. This is not, it's happened here in Denton. It happens, right? So, it's real. So people have asked me before, what's the difference between you and other doctors I've seen? I say, well, I believe my patients. Like, because they get that. Well, we looked at your labs, you're fine. Don't think I'm fine. No, you're fine. Something else pops up, come see us. It's like, I don't feel fine. Something's definitely wrong. So if a patient tells me something's wrong, I believe them. If they say they're depressed, I believe them. Right? We have to figure out what the actual thing is. If sometimes, that's just saying I don't really know what it is. Right? And that's okay. If you don't know, just say you don't know. But I tell them, we haven't figured it out yet, but there's something that we've missed, and it's going to be in here. It will be in this realm. Right? So, having compassion on people is helpful. I would also mention, actually, I wasn't going to even talk about this, but I think it's probably a good time to mention this. So, how many of you guys are into New Year's resolutions? How many of you guys are like goal setters? We'll skip that part. Let's just skip that part. That was funny.
Don't want to call me out.
You have like two very sheepish hands. All I was going to mention about that is, I tell people when it comes to New Year's resolutions and everything, I like the idea of setting goals. It's great. But just be careful not to set goals that are too lofty, too crazy, too outlandish, because it actually causes people to be depressed. You set this crazy goal, it's not really attainable, there's really no roadmap to get there, and then it's frustrating and depressing. So, I tell people to make realistic goals. Perfectionism is a real thing. I'm not going to ask anybody to raise their hand because they probably won't, but how many of you guys are perfectionists? Anybody here? No. Perfectionism is the thief of joy, okay? Because unfortunately, no matter how well you do it, there's always some way you could have improved. And so before you instead of being able to just relish in the good, you just move right on to what's missing. And it's hard, right? True perfectionist, it's like you get 98 on a test and you're wondering what 2 questions you missed. Well, did they word that right? How did I miss that? Was that in my notes? Gosh, and it's like, you got an A on the test, you should just be happy you got an A. So what I tell my perfectionist is, well, actually what my mentor used to have, he had this sign in his office. He said, perfection is forbidden, excellence is encouraged.
Perfectionism what?
Perfection is forbidden, excellence is encouraged. Right? So, maybe not a lot of you, but if you're in that realm, realize that expectations can lead to depression. If you're not living up, or other people aren't living up to the expectation you're trying to meet, it can be depressing. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have vigorous goals. I'm just saying we got to be careful with that, because it can make your life hard and everybody else's life around you hard. People that are true perfectionists, they don't realize it. They may not realize it, and they may not even ever say it to other people. But if you have a high standard for yourself, you just tend to what?
Expected of others.
You have a high standard of others. It's just the way that it is, right? And so you don't necessarily realize that that's what's happening. And once again, I don't want anybody to even feel bad about this now. It's just, people around you, it's hard. It's hard for them, right? So if you recognize that within yourself, that may be a big thing to work on. That would be an actual good New Year's resolution, actually. Take a hard look and evaluate your expectations. Because like I said, it can be difficult for you and for others. And I know so many people who've really changed. They've really made a big, the happiness factor, the satisfaction factor of their life went up a significant amount when they just started having more realistic expectations. Unfortunately, we live in a society, right, a social media society, where what do we see all the time?
Perfection.
You just see the perfection, that's all you see. You see the good. There are some people that...
Airbrush models.
Yeah, the models.
Snapchat filters.
Snapchat. How many, okay, I'm going to ask the women. What percentage of women do you think are 100% happy with the way they look?
0.
1%.
I would agree. I know very few, right? 0%. That's messed up, right? Why should people feel that bad about how they look? That's not, I don't think God wants it to be that way. That is an unattainable, unrealistic expectation that is now depressing people. And we have to, you have to make a conscious effort to break out of that. You may not realize how much pressure that's putting on you. How unhappy people are with how they're looking, or the money they're making, the car they're driving, the house they're living in. They may not necessarily realize how unhappy they are and what their actual expectation is. So take a look at that. And that kind of falls in more of the emotional realm. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, and we'll do some demos, and if you guys have any questions, we can answer them. But when we talk about emotional realm, I talked about the psychological factor, and talking about problems can be very helpful, analyzing them, looking at your behavior, trying to understand the dynamics of families and things like that, the dysfunction that's there. It's actually funny, I was talking to a counselor the other day, and they said, well, the definition of dysfunction is any more than two people getting together. Right? And you talked about marriage, right? God definitely has a sense of humor. Here we take this dysfunctional family and this dysfunctional family, and we slam them together and ask a man and a woman to be one, right? It's like, that's almost funny, right? So there's, we're all dealing with these dynamics, right? But then you look, like I said, you look on social media and everything seems great, amazing and perfect, and they're on the beach and you've got the body, and it's like, man, but it's tough because that's not real, right? It's not real. It's not how real life actually is. So the technique that we use in the office is based on working on the subconscious mind. So emotions, this is going to be if you remember anything from tonight, we talked about emotion, this is the one thing I want you to remember. Two, your subconscious mind forgets nothing. It has no concept of time, and that's where all your memory and emotion come from. Okay? So, your emotions are not rational. Would you guys agree? Anybody had a non-rational emotion? Everybody should raise your hand. Emotions don't come from a rational part of your brain.
So did you say that emotions are
They are non-rational. Not irrational, non-rational.
Forgets nothing, has no concept of time.
Forgets nothing, has no concept of time, and that area of your brain is where your memory and your emotion comes from, subconscious. Okay? The reason those little factoids are important is because when you feel an emotion and then you try and describe what it is consciously and try and make sense of why you do what you do, it doesn't always work because you may not know. You ever looked at somebody and said, why would they do that? It makes no sense. Well, guess what? They may not know either. It's true, right? So what we want to do, when somebody has, let's use PTSD for an example. Do you think most people, I'll just use a pretty generic, classic kind of PTSD case. Let's say somebody was over in the Middle East, Afghanistan, and there was an explosion, there was some trauma there, maybe people lost their lives, and now they have sound triggers now, right? Certain sounds, triggers, right? Do you think that they understand that a door slamming is not a bomb? Like consciously, does it make sense? Yeah, they totally make sense. Like they're not dumb, right? The problem is when it happens, it triggers a part of their brain, a survival instinct, an emotional level part of their brain, and they can't help what happens after that, right? Their body goes into a different mode, a different part of their brain is now in control. Anybody ever had their fight or flight mode take over? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, that's like a different part of your brain. That's a survival thing. So how effective do you think talking it out therapy is for PTSD? It's not. It's not, because it's not actually addressing the same area of the brain. The area of your brain, the logical part that has to do with language, that's your cortex. That's what makes us human. But that has nothing to do with where this trauma actually comes from. And like I said, you can see that on scans of the brain. They can literally do a scan, SPECT scans, and different scans on the brain, and they can show you this part of the brain, the amygdala, this part of the limbic system, this is involved. And that part of the brain doesn't communicate with language. It just doesn't. So we have to, if you really want to help this, you have to access deeper levels of the brain. And when I say deeper, I literally mean the outside layer of your brain, your cortex, that's your behavioral part of the brain that talks. And then your limbic system is deeper, and then your survival instinct is all the way down in your brainstem. Cerebellum, brainstem, it's deep, 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 right? So reptiles actually have the survival instinct. Mammals have the limbic system, and then humans have the cortex, right?
So I'm confused a little bit. So most of us know people who were at Omaha Beach.
Mm-hmm.
They were at Normandy Beach. They saw hundreds of thousands of their buddies die. They came home, there was no such thing as PTSD. They didn't talk about the war. They didn't have nightmares. They didn't.
Well, not everybody
they
has
didn't sit around and
PTSD.
discuss all kinds of traumas. They didn't jump around when a door slammed. A lot of them in Korea, my father, for example.
Mhm.
Why is it that it seems to me that we heard about PTSD after Vietnam, and it became prevalent and something everyone discussed, but there's been men and women in wartime by the millions. Why doesn't everyone in combat then suffer from some form of trauma that we classify as PTSD?
So your brain has to make that connection, and not everybody does. Some people go through traumatic things, and that connection isn't actually made, and they're okay. It's the people that it doesn't. And the way I would, my best answer for this would be certain neurological disorders. They say, you know, they haven't been around. They weren't around before. They're a new thing. And what they found out was they just didn't have the technology to diagnose them before, and they were actually around before. They didn't even have the terms. The term emotion and depression, and these are all new. Anxiety. So if you look back in the text, say, well, you know, people didn't have anxiety a couple hundred years ago. It's like, well, they didn't even have the word anxiety, right? So part of it is just actually being able to diagnose it appropriately. Because what most people did, if they had a problem, they just self-medicated. they just drank or whatever, right? And that's how they dealt with it. So is there more PTSD than before? Hard to say exactly. But not everybody that goes to war ends up with PTSD. And people can see horrific things and they don't necessarily get it. But the ones who do, it is serious. It can seriously affect and mess up their life. So, you know, we could all right here, there could be a bomb go off in this building, and some of the people here would end up with PTSD and some wouldn't. There's no necessarily rhyme or reason and why and how that happens. Does that make sense? Not everybody's getting it.
Does that make the people that don't get it stronger than the people that?
Not necessarily. It's just the way that your system works. What we do know that people who you do have a higher incidence of PTSD if some of these other things are in the way. So if they've had toxicities, if they're already mentally, emotionally stressed, if they got insomnia, they're not sleeping well, if they've had head traumas, there's actually a huge connection with head trauma and PTSD. So if they've had a concussion and then they were in, and actually a lot of times they go hand in hand, part of whatever happened to them that created the PTSD also can cause concussions. So there's other factors that are kind of involved, and there's trying to dice all that out right now. If you want to watch the show, the movie Concussion with Will Smith, he talks about the football players and all what's going on there. And you know, they now have proof from actual brains that they've diced up and examined, and they can literally show the scarring and the trauma that's happened to that brain because of those hits. So
And nobody's got a good diet anymore.
that's not good. So you're set up. We have a
They
higher
used to.
incidence of
But they
Yeah.
don't now.
no. So let's talk a little bit about the technique. So the technique that we use can help us access what's going on within the subconscious mind. And we can get an idea of what the subconscious mind is perceiving when these events occurred, when they started, who was involved. And then using acupuncture points and essential oils, we can help the brain to disconnect that. Disconnect that belief, disconnect that reaction that it's having. So I want to do a demo. So I don't know if I heard you have a headache over here. Do you have a headache? You want to do a demo? Are you okay? You want to come on up here? What's that? You don't have to come up if you don't want to, but if you want to get it treated, I can.
Me. Yeah, her. Me.
She's having a stutter.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a 3-day migraine.
Do you want to come up still? You're fine. We'll be more than happy to help you. Come on up here.
It would be awesome.
For new solutions.
So you've had this for 3 days? Do you get these pretty often? Does she have any other neurological stuff, seizures or any other problems?
FNS, it's all stress related.
Stress
Every
related?
doctor has said it's stress related. So,
And she's had it for 3
we're
days?
looking, this one, yeah.
How often does she get them?
Every few weeks, every week.
Every week? Alright, you okay if we do a little, have you ever been muscle tested before? Okay. What I want you to do is I want to put your arm up here like this, push it for me. I want you to look at the wall back there for me. Look at my finger here. Are you having trouble with lights? Yeah, bright lights? Okay. Look out there one more time. Look at my finger. Put your hand on your forehead for me. Okay. Look at the wall there for me. Look at my finger. I'll explain what I'm doing here in a second. I'm going to use this light right here. Just look at me. Just follow my finger here. Swallow. Look at the wall. Look at my finger. The wall. Finger. The wall. My finger. Swallow me for me. I'm just gonna go like this. You get stuck in fight or flight mode, don't you? Yeah. Again. Deep breath. Swallow again for me. Gentle and nice. Yeah, your pupils are really. Swallow again for me. Okay, we're just gonna tap here a few more times. You can test it for food issues.
I can't have gluten, my dear.
Push up here for me. Alright, look at the wall for me. Look at my fingers. Oh, that's better. Does that feel easier? How's your head feeling? Yeah? Keep going?
Not all the way,
but it
hurts a lot less.
A lot less, okay. We're almost there. Put your hand on your forehead for me. Push up here. Alright. Okay, so there is a stress component to this. Want to get rid of that? Push up here. Alright. So your mind remembers everything. So she's actually calmed down a lot already. Right? With the laser, just getting her nervous system back to normal. She's stuck in a fight or flight mode. Just oof. Alright, let's check the concept of money and love. Friends. Family. Okay, family. Touching on some acupuncture points on her wrist. Okay, what's the anger? Anger's about something that's not right or not fair. Yeah, what's the resentment? Is it something you don't want to share? What's the resentment in the family then?
Just feeling like unfair situations and having to go too fast.
Having to go too fast?
Grow up
Why would you have to grow up too fast?
because I had to help support.
So did you feel a lot of pressure then? So do you have a lot of responsibility?
Not as much now, but I used to.
But you used to? So you felt a lot of pressure to what, help take care of siblings or family, or what did you have to do? So you had pressure to take care of the family.
Just my mom and I.
Okay. Put a drop of this one on your wrist. Rub your wrists together for me. Put this one on there as well. Okay, rub those wrists together for me. Go like this. Put your hands on your forehead. Think about how stressed out you've been. Think about the resentment. Think about having to help out with rent, utilities. It just feels like a lot of pressure. And it's just overwhelming for you, and it's causing some resentment and a lot of stress. And I want you to just take deep breaths until you feel that alleviate, okay? Hands down here. All right. Push up for me. I want you to say it's okay if I can't fix all my family's problems.
It's okay if I can't fix it.
I'm gonna be okay.
I'm gonna be okay.
It's okay to tell mom when I'm overwhelmed.
It's okay to tell mom I'm not here.
It's okay if I can't do something.
It's okay to do
There we go. That's a lot better. All right. How's your head feeling?
a lot better.
Is it gone? It's gone? All right. Feeling a little better? Yeah. All right.
We couldn't hear anything that you were saying, can you?
Sorry, so you guys might not have been able to see what I was doing, but I was using the light therapy. You may have seen she was shaking a lot, her eyes were all over the place, she was having difficulty with the lights. So we did the light therapy on the cranial nerves. We rehabilitated her eye motions, we shined some lights in the eyes, helped her with the bright lights. That calmed down her nervous system a lot. We worked on her vagus nerve because she was stuck in this like fight or flight mode. And then we did some emotional work around resentment, feeling a lot of pressure to have to help the family take care of rent, utilities and things, and she was feeling a lot of pressure about that. So we just put some essential oils on there and helped her brain to process through that stress and break the connection that she was feeling to all of those things. And she didn't have to be the one to fix all the problems in the family. And now, oh, look at that.
Yeah.
Can you talk now?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and she was having some stuttering issues with that. Anyway, come give her a hand. That was excellent. All right. Anybody have any questions about that?
What oils did you use and why?
So I used lemon oil. That's for resentment and frustration. And then I used the ylang ylang. That's about being good enough. So, anyway.
And when you notice the difference, like when you're weak, that's when you identify the problem in the
Mhm.
area. And then when the arm is strong, that's when you know that she's processing it, or that the oil is helping, or.
So yeah, so the muscle testing that I did on her, the reflex testing, the muscle testing helps us to determine where the problems are at. So when I muscle tested her and I had her move her eyes around, she was like, ooh, really weak. Her eyes are having a really hard time with the light. And like right now, she's totally locked in, like poof, right? Before, her eyes were all over the place from the lights. So when I muscle tested her and shined lights in there and moved her around, she was really weak. Her nervous system was totally breaking down. When I used the light on there, it strengthened it back up. So when I did it again, her muscle remained nice and strong, which means she's now got connection there in the nervous system. And then with the muscle testing with the emotional thing, when I asked her body if it was like money or job or whatever, that was fine. When I asked about love, weak. And then when I asked about family, that was weak. I touched on the points on the wrist and it told me exactly which system it was. And so I knew which emotion was related to it. The acupuncturist a long time ago figured out which emotions were related to what meridian systems. So that's how I knew what to do. And over a period of a couple of years, I figured out what essential oils relate to which systems and which emotions. And so lemon helps people with anger and frustration and resentment. She literally smells it, which the smell factor goes right into your limbic system. And actually, if you want to come to the office on the 29th, on Tuesday, I actually teach a technique called the EO technique, and that is a way for you to process emotions on your own using a couple essential oils. Very simple technique. Hand position is what I taught her there. But it's free if you want to come learn about it. But it's a great way to help with stress at home. I mean,
What did you
'cause
call it?
EO technique, emotions and oils. You can actually go to the website, eotechnique.com, watch a training video there if you can't come to my office. You can download the handouts and you can start using it at home. Little kids, friends, family, my little kids use it. It's really simple, it's safe, and it's fast. It's not counseling. I didn't do any counseling with her at all. I just helped her brain. Like, she needed to break some of those connections that she had. But I mean, look at her now. I was watching her the whole time. She was kind of like hiding in there and really struggling. And now she's like, boop, back up. So, anybody have any question about that?
I'm interested in the, was it light there? What
Yeah.
exactly is that doing?
So this light right here, this very expensive flashlight, amplifies nerve signals. So there's a wavelength and a frequency, and right inside that wavelength and frequency, you can increase the energy production of the nerve cell. So there's enzymes inside that cell that ramp up, and boom, you increase the energy. And if you do that while you're stimulating the weak pathway, whatever it is that she's weak at, with her it was we did it through the eyes, it amplifies that nerve signal and helps those systems to reconnect. But it happens very fast because, you know, light travels fast. So does that make sense? I could shine that light like let's say that you came in and your fingers were tingly and you had a pinched nerve in your neck. I could shine the light on your neck, stimulate that nerve, and immediately help get strength back and help the tingling or numbness, weakness, whatever in the hand.
It's like reconnecting the wires.
Exactly. Yep. And so like
Put the wires together.
you could have a low back pain, same thing. You come in like this, oh man, it's bad. I can go in there and I can muscle test, and I can find a weak muscle that's inhibited, we call it, and I can find where the nerve root is. Okay, it comes from right here. Shine the light on it, treat it, and in a lot of instances, we'll get a change in strength. And it's not always just a one and done thing though, but you know, you can get a change. So that's what we're looking for.
How do you diagnose like the mono, the infections, those kinds of things? How
So
do you
we use
figure
test
out
files,
those?
we use muscle testing. Oh, we send out for labs if we need to, you know.
Muscle testing?
But muscle testing, we have vials of foods and infections and toxicities and different things. And we just bring those into the body and then we see how the body reacts to those. So if you have an allergen to gluten, if we introduce it to your body, the system is going to weaken. And we can tell based on the reflex a lot of stuff. It's incredibly accurate too.
And how do you introduce that to the body?
So it's a vial that has that and you literally touch it onto the body. So you can test anything. Have people come in, oh, I think I have problems with avocados, like when I eat them, my throat gets tickly. Well, bring one in, I can have them hold it and test it, and if it's weakened, then we know we got a problem. So the muscle testing is a really cool technology. So,
And that works even in the cases that you were mentioning earlier, in which you introduced gluten into the body, but it didn't show up until 7 days later, when they had a headache.
so the person is still reacting to it, so I can tell from the muscle test right then, but the symptoms that they get could vary like crazy. I mean, they could have hormone problems, they could have from eating it, but the muscle test will tell me immediately if they have a problem. So, all right, guys. Well, what's that?
She wanted to volunteer, didn't you?
Want
I didn't
You want me to do a demo on you?
more demonstration?
Well, come on over
More
there.
demonstration?
Yes.
You want to see another one? You guys okay on time? Tell me what's going on with you.
Okay, I'm stuck in my life and I'm not motivated, I remember the days when I was and I'm not anymore. And I'm just living now. I'm just living.
Survival mode.
I'm in survival mode.
And how long ago was this, do you think, that things shifted?
A long time,
10 years, more?
more.
Did anything happen at that time? Anything shift?
Well, my kids left and I got, I got more free time. My kids grew up and my husband's an airline pilot and he's gone a lot. And I just feel like I just kind of make sure the doors are locked, and that's really all I do.
Okay, so I'm not gonna be able to do like a full workup on all of these things right here, right? Like I can't just all of your foods affects all this stuff. But let's just see if there is an emotional component to this, maybe a belief system thing here. So have you ever been muscle tested before?
Oh, yeah.
Put your arm up here. Okay. So I want you to say, and I'm kind of jumping a lot of things here. We're kind of shortcutting some stuff, but we're just going to jump right into what she just told me. I have a purpose since my kids left.
I have a purpose since my kids left.
Fear? So why'd that cause fear? Tell me about your purpose. Tell me about fear. Tell me about them leaving.
I don't know.
How'd you feel as a mom?
I felt responsible and I felt effective and I felt dedicated and maybe a little driven. We homeschooled, so I did it all.
You did it all.
And now they're grown and I feel like maybe they don't like me as much as maybe I was too hard on them, and I was trying to do the right thing, and now they are resentful because of it.
So what's your fear then?
They don't love me.
Think about that feeling. This together. Put your hands like this. Put your thumbs on your forehead. Cross your fingers like that. Like this. And then close your eyes. Just pretend these guys aren't here. Think about your purpose. Think about how driven you were as a mom. You had it together. You were homeschooling them. You were loving them. Maybe you were too hard on them, but you were doing it for the right reason. You were trying really hard. And then they leave. And now they're saying, now they're maybe even resentful, and you're starting to feel like you're not loved.
They didn't appreciate what I did for them.
Take some deep breaths. Okay, there you go. Okay, this arm up here. Hold that there. I can feel loved now.
Okay, what was that? What was that stuff?
That was cardamom.
Okay.
I want you to say I can be loved.
I can be loved.
There we go. My kids can love me.
My kids can love me.
It's okay if they're upset about some stuff.
They are upset about it.
What kid's not upset about some stuff? They can still love me.
Yeah,
They can still appreciate
Yeah.
me.
they can.
They can still be grateful,
Yeah.
even though they're upset about some stuff.
Yeah.
I can have a purpose in life now.
I can have a purpose in life.
I can be
now.
driven like I was before.
Maybe not. Maybe not that much.
No, say it. Say it. I can be driven like I
I
was.
can be driven.
Yeah. I'm gonna be okay.
I'm gonna be okay.
All right.
Okay. Yeah,
There you go.
yeah.
Did that feel better when you said it?
Yes, it felt better. It felt a lot better, and I'm gonna come see you.
All right, well, thank you for coming out. Wow, thanks for being brave, that was great. You're gonna feel a lot better. Feel a lot better. We still need to look at all the other factors here. There's still a high likelihood that we've got something going on in here or in other ways, right? But man, that's gonna be huge for you. Any questions about that?
Why cardamom?
Cardamom oil helps with fear. Her fear is not being loved. So cardamom helps with fear.
Again, part of the EO.
It's on the, if you go to the EO website, it's got it on there, the list is on there, the whole technique's for free, anybody who wants it can use it. We've got a handout that has all of the oils that you would use for negative emotions, all the oils you would use for positive intentions if you want to focus on a particular positive emotion. And we even have a personality type thing that we do with emotions. So you can find your own type and what oil would help you to balance out that. So,
Sorry, would there be like a benefit to using those during a meditation or something like that? Are there things
yeah.
maybe on the
Absolutely.
website? I'm saying like, are there suggestions of,
so
you just look at the reference?
we show the reference, we show how to do it on there, and we make some suggestions, but it's really whenever you need it. I mean, you may get some bad news, and you may be going through some serious grief, and you may do it every hour. You may put ginger on every hour. You may, hey, I got a new job, I want to feel creative, and put the oil on and focus on that. And so it really depends on your life situation, really. So just kind of following your intuition. But you could use them in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different situations. Use them on kids, family, friends, co-workers, whatever. It could be, like I said, it could be used for difficult situations. It can be used daily to help balance out personality. And when you really get to know them and you use them well, you can use them to help communicate better, to move forward if you're feeling stuck. You can use them to feel joy, to courage, whatever kind of thing you feel like you need in the moment. You can use the oils that can help. So.
I just wanted
Earlier you were talking about words, you were talking about talking to someone about their feelings or whatever, if they have PTSD, that's not really gonna help them.
Yes.
When you do diagnostics and when you work with a patient, you talk to them, you ask them questions and you have them respond back. There is power in words.
Oh, yeah.
Right, and some of the power in those words come out in them identifying and even re-identifying with you specific issues and specific things, and when they speak those things out, it helps them.
There is definitely power in words, yeah. So I don't want to give the impression that there isn't, but being able to access that deeper level is super important. But there's tons of power in words. Being compassionate and empathetic and understanding is huge. It's absolutely humongous. I would actually say, if anybody came to me and just said, hey, what could I do better with my spouse or my relationship, I would say, validate them. Just recognize that how they're feeling is how they're feeling. That's a big deal, right? That even if you don't get it, even if you don't understand it, just saying, yeah, that must be hard, trying to understand, that's a big deal. So, sure.
There was the question about why cardamom, and I just wanted you to explain that it was through all of your experience and that you've researched that you figured out which oils go with which emotion.
Yeah, I spent about 6 years just figuring out which oils go with which emotion. Over literally thousands and thousands of treatments and cases, figuring out which oil links up with which emotion, and that's how we found these correlations. So it took quite a long time and a lot of experience to do it, but now we know. Yeah, class, if you want to come to the office.
It's an amazing class, people, I'm telling you.
Is it
You will
at night?
learn a lot.
What's that?
Is it
Night class?
Night class, 7 o'clock at the office.
Well, maybe. Maybe dated
Well.
people.
Yeah, unless I have a baby.
Might have to come here.
Yeah.
Is that baby coming around that time?
We could have a baby around that time, we'll
You
see.
have on the 23rd.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
well, thanks. Okay, So I'm getting the you better wrap it up signal. So, thanks for coming, guys. We appreciate it. Let's do the raffle. We got a balanced oil blend that we're giving away.
Okay, explain to them about balance.
Maggie was lying when she said you guys were getting a Hawaii trip.
Cardamom? Balance. Balance is the
Balance.
oil.
This blend actually has frankincense. It has, what is it? Spruce. It's got spruce, hoe wood, blue tansy, blue chamomile. This is for balance. This is an awesome oil.
What is blue tansy?
Blue tansy?
Yes.
Blue tansy is really expensive oil. It's like $150 a bottle. Yeah, and so it has really powerful energetic properties. It actually affects the endocannabinoid system. So, you guys heard of CBD oil? Yeah, so you're working on a similar wavelength there. So it's super calming to the body.
I want a gallon.
We want some balance.
That one.
All right, let's see what we got here. All right, we need a drum roll. 501890.
It's not Lisa.
890.
890. Oh!
Needs some balance. Thank you. So if you guys are interested in other workshops, we do them once a month. And so you can find all that information right now on the Facebook page, or you can call the office. We're working on getting the calendar finished and set up hopefully by this weekend on the website. That'll have all of the events. So the rest for this month, we just have a Slim and Sassy class on Tuesday, which is more about it's an essential oils class, and it's I keep wanting to say pH balance, and it's not pH balance. Blood sugar balance, and weight loss. So that's on Tuesday, and then the 29th we have the EO technique class, and that will complete the month of classes for January. And then February is a little bit ETA because they do. So we'll hope to see you guys there. Check out the Facebook page. Facebook is Well Within Frisco, Texas. So you can find most information there. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Oh my gosh. I